Today, some about the mission, some about Mother, some about Lent. Father Jim Marchanda, Sister Ann Willits left about 7:45 on Thursday morning. And right now, one of them is in Florida, and one of them is in, I think it's Louisiana, separately preaching other missions. I want to thank them for the tremendous goodness and godness that they brought. And it was a blessing that they were here when I had to be gone part of the time to be with my mother before she died. And I especially thank Jackie Miller also for the many hours she put in at that time. Last Sunday, Father Marchanda mentioned the words of Pope Benedict XVI on Ash Wednesday at St. Sabina in Rome. The words were the absolute certainty of God's love. Now, I had not read about that previously. But the more I think about it and pray about that, the more I realize the implications. The more we need to bring into ourselves the awareness of that absolute certainty. Not on God's part, but on our part, of God's love and our response and how we live. They also talked about becoming what we pray. And becoming, these are their words, becoming what we pray for. The example given most often was peace, but whatever that might be. Becoming what we pray for in the presence of God. And you could say Presents or Presence, which goes back to that absolute certainty of God's love. Second item, Mother. Very briefly, Mother lived in the home that Dad had built for 70 years and a couple months, until October 11th, at which point I took her to the emergency ward, and the doctor sent her home and said, I don't send 97-year-old people home. But the next day, she was admitted to the hospital and realized she'd not be going home again. Went to a nursing home for rehabbed, but not quite enough to go home. Then lived with my brother and sister-in-law since December 7th, and I'm very appreciative of their taking care of her. On the first Sunday of Lent, she signed herself into hospice. She was very alert. Very alert. Next day, we don't know if she had a stroke or just decided it was time or what. But from that point on, she really couldn't much communicate and didn't eat. And 8 days later, she died peacefully. We were there, not in the room, but in the house at that time. And yesterday, I had mentioned, first of all, that she was born 8 days after the Titanic went down. She was baptized 5 days after she was born. With the exception of just a little bit of apartment living after marriage, she lived in 2 houses her whole life. My dad lived in 2 houses his whole life. My dad had 1 parish his whole life. My mother had 2 parishes her whole life. My dad had 1 job. My mother had 1 job. Teacher, although she taught in 2 different schools. And that's not too common anymore. She was told by Dr. Gunderson in La Crosse in 1936 she should not have any children because of the formation of her pelvic area. But she did anyway, for which my brother and I are grateful. She told me a couple years ago that she and my dad were totally faithful to each other during their whole life. I have a symbol here. This is a scissors. This isn't the real scissors I had yesterday, but it's about the same size. The first Christmas after they were married, my mother had 0 money to her name. My dad was working for 25 or 30 cents an hour. And the first Christmas, Dad bought Mother a pair of scissors. And Mother told me she either bought him nothing, because she had nothing, or maybe she said they gave it to each other. But that was their first Christmas, a pair of scissors. And there were other difficult times, including have to deal with me and my brother, but that's a separate story. They both lived lives of tremendous dependence on God and tremendous faith. I read this morning in Liturgy of the Hours, the prayer book that we use, that we are called not to be immortal, but to be holy. And that really spoke to me this morning. We are called not to be immortal, but to be holy. And in my judgment, both Mother and Dad, in very different ways, because of their personalities, were both very holy in the real and good sense. Again, I thank you for those who came to the visitation, to the funeral, who sent emails, who sent cards, personal conversations like this morning, etc. I've never ever gotten so many hugs in such a short period of time. The funeral liturgy was just powerful, and I haven't come down yet. Someday I will, and I will need you at that time because you are my family. Just a word, kind of related. Technology was absolutely blew my mind away in terms of the sending out of development, sending out of the obituary and organizing, and all of that. We have emails from Africa, Europe, South America, New Zealand, many parts of the United States. And of those across the world, with the exception of one person, I think she had met them all. But that's not what's important. That was just kind of a side thing.